How do we react when we feel anger? The past year, a year filled with grief, anxiety, and fear, caught all of us off guard emotionally. The book of Proverbs counsels us that it is better to be slow to anger than mighty, better to have self-control than to conquer a city. How can we manage to stay in control when it feels like the world not only turned upside down, but in so many instances it feels like the world turned its back on the Jewish community? Our tradition teaches us that anger can be a useful and generative emotion. Maimonides understands anger as a force in our lives that requires balance. He writes that one should not be of an angry disposition and be easily angered, nor should one be like a dead person who does not feel. Rather, one should be in the middle. One should not get angry except over a big matter about which it is fitting to get angry. Maimonides is history's most famous Jewish advocate of the golden mean, the need to find a sustainable middle path, and this is a perfect example. There are times when we must let our tempers boil, and we need to ensure that anger does not come to define our disposition. This is not merely a human struggle. As Rabbi Mary Chernow points out, anger is in fact a godly attribute, and something that God struggles to balance as well. In the 13 attributes of mercy, which we will recite countless times over the next 24 hours, God is described as erech apayim, slow to anger. Not never angry, Rabbi Chernow points out, but slow to anger. Anger is something God experiences and must constructively address. We too, then, must reckon with how to best deal with this fiery emotion. Rabbi Chernow continues, anger in the right measure is actually a teacher. It can function like a bright red flashing indicator light on our emotional dashboard, alerting us to a matter in need of attention. As a signal to our souls, anger can be holy. It can reveal a deep passion or perhaps a wound, a longing, or a regret. It can help us clarify and prioritize. In a world that is filled with anger, I wonder how often it has been used as a teacher, as Rabbi Chernow suggests, and how often it has been utilized as an end in its own right. Vitriol that is undirected, unresolvable, and lacking nuance is all too commonplace and at times even celebrated. Our political system seems to run on unproductive rage with the politics of grievance, often undercutting the importance of compromise and common sense. And certainly the anti-Israel protest movements that sprang up after October 7th celebrated anger and outrage, while so many of the participants were ignorant of the history of the conflict they were outraged about or the danger of their words. Unfortunately, and perhaps understandably, unmitigated rage was present in Israeli society in the aftermath of that tragic day as well, with Israeli government ministers and army leaders making public statements that wound up being used against Israel in the International Criminal Court. The Kartzer Rabbi in 18th century Lithuania taught that long ago I conquered my anger and I placed it in my pocket. When I have need of it, I take it out. That is a level of control we need to aspire to. We cannot afford to have our anger unleashed, unchecked, to be quick to anger ourselves. Unfortunately, when we are reactive with our rage, in hindsight, we often see behavior that uncomfortably mirrors that which we would condemn in others. That is true when we are thinking about the specter of political violence in America, which we have seen rear its ugly head on both sides of the aisle, with the attempted assassination of Donald Trump and the attack on Nancy Pelosi's husband, no matter how much you dislike either politician or their affiliated political parties. It is true when those in the anti-Zionist movement promote intifada, when they utilize Hamas's inverted red triangle in their protests or call for the death of Zionists. And it is also sadly true when Israeli ministers on the far right incite settler violence in the West Bank or try to silence those advocating for the freedom of hostages held in Gaza. Yossi Klein Halevi, the American-Israeli writer and fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute, and a voice that has been instrumental in keeping me informed over the course of the last years, writes that there is an essential move in fighting evil, and it is directed inward. We need to resist the temptation to adopt the ways of our enemies. I have felt anger over the past year that I am sure is justified, anger that I assume Maimonides would feel right along with me. We should be angry, letting our anger serve as an indicator to others that lines have been crossed, that a wound has been inflicted. We should be enraged at those who say Israel has no right to exist. We should not be ready to forgive those who justify or deny the brutal tactics used by Hamas on October 7th. We cannot help but feel anger when Jews are ostracized from the worlds of literature, arts, and social justice movements to which they have dedicated their lives, simply because they do believe that Israel has a right to exist and to defend herself. And we need to be angry at those who promote anti-Semitic conspiracies and rhetoric, senselessly blaming Jews for the ills of the world. But when our own anger and indignation is utilized to build an impenetrable wall around Israel or its leadership or individual actions, that may lead to a future or even to a present that is more volatile. A future that will only give us and so many others cause for more anger. The same is true when we create ideological political bunkers in America. In both cases, we must realize, to quote once more from Yossi Klein Halevi, that no ideological camp may impose the totality of its political and cultural agenda on a fractious people. And when we approach painful conversations that will inflame social tensions, we do so with respect, appreciating that each ideological camp embodies an essential truth of our identity and experience. I hope we realize that an openness to measured internal critique will serve to strengthen and unify the Jewish people and, God willing, American citizens as well. The 13 attributes of mercy are dictated by God to Moses in the aftermath of the sin of the golden calf. As God gives Moses a formula to ensure that God's mercy and slowness to anger will prevent him from ever destroying the Jewish people. The text in Exodus, however, continues on with a warning that is not reflected in our liturgy with good reason. Adonai, Adonai, God showing mercy, showing favor, long-suffering in anger, abundant in loyalty and faithfulness, keeping loyalty to the 1,000th generation, bearing iniquity, rebellion, and sin. That's the comforting part we all know. But here's the curveball. Yet not clearing the guilty, calling to account the iniquity of the parents upon the children and upon children's children to the 3rd and 4th generation. We do not like to think about the sins of individuals being visited upon their children or their grandchildren. However, in our day, that is not God's doing. It is too often humanity's own. There's a generation of children in Israel, the Palestinian territories, in Lebanon, in so many other places in the world, who will grow up with their own trauma and entrenched mistrust of the other side, in addition to the trauma inherited from their parents and grandparents. As much damage as we have seen done in real time by the devastations of the past year, we have likely seen only the tip of the iceberg. As American Jews, we face our own deep-seated tensions with the third and fourth generations. We are frustrated with younger generations of American Jews who do not understand or relate to what made Israel so important to us or to their parents and grandparents. That is a gap that must be bridged through conversation and education, but also through a commitment to hearing what they have to say, why they feel the way they do. We are also seeing an increased number of Jews who have historically supported Israel who now feel dismayed by the scope and scale of destruction and death in Gaza. In our list of al-Chaitz, the list of sins we are admitting together as a community, we need to add that we have taken our own love for the land of Israel for granted. I know the anger that rises when talking to a Jew who doesn't think Israel should exist, or engage in a conversation with someone who has given up on the hope and dream that Israel represents. Even when that anger is justified, we must approach it slowly and with caution. American and world Jewry cannot afford further rifts during this historically precarious time. Nor can we stop talking to our children, our grandchildren, our nieces and nephews and cousins, or our parents and our grandparents about the issues most important to the Jewish people. There is simply too much at stake. The Torah teaches 3 times in Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy that penalties for inflicting physical harm on another human shall be life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, and bruise for bruise. This system of justice was consistent with other contemporaneous societies, including most famously as recorded in the Code of Hammurabi. We can also see how this might be understood as an outlet for the impulse to anger. That evening the score will put the matter to bed. Not only will the victim never again have to experience such harm, but the perpetrator will never again be able to inflict it. The rabbinic discourse around eye for an eye refuses to accept that status quo and drastically reframes this conception of justice. The Mishnah unequivocally states that the punishment for inflicting bodily harm is to be limited to monetary restitution. The Talmud, the next layer of rabbinic discourse unpacking the Mishnah, gives no less than 10 reasons why this in fact must be so, including arguments that invoke an aggressor who was already blind, or the relative way we each experience pain that precludes such a punishment from ever being equal to the damage and suffering caused to the initial victim. The clear upshot is that physical harm should not be punished with more physical harm. I want to emphasize just how drastic is this change that the rabbis made. The Torah is very clear, saying explicitly 3 times eye for an eye. To negate those words, in fact, to negate the very idea behind those words, that we rely on corporal punishment, that like is punished with like, is nothing less than revolutionary and a call for us not to react in anger, to step back from the abyss of escalation that can come from trying to get even. Etgar Keret, the award-winning Israeli author, gives a piece of practical advice about stepping back from that abyss in a passage called Signs of Life, written for a young girl whose father had been killed on October 7th. Now close your eyes and try to stop being angry. Try to stop raging at all those who deserve your righteous fury. Close your eyes and allow yourself just for a moment to simply feel the pain, to hesitate, to be confused, to feel sorrow, to feel remorse. You still have your whole life to spend persecuting, avenging, and reckoning. But for now, just close your eyes and look inward like a satellite hovering over a disaster zone, searching for signs of life. A lot has been taken away from you, but you are still a human being. Wounded, bloodied, angry, hurting, frightened, drowning in sorrow, but still human. Take a deep breath and try to remember the feeling, because you know that a minute from now, when you open your eyes again, it will be gone. As we approach a year that we know will ask so much of us as Jews, as Americans, and as American Jews, we must, for at least a moment, try to stop being angry. Try not to react to the uncontrolled anger of others, and to show up with all the humanity we can muster. And we must remember that what lies at the core of our tradition is not ayin tachat ayin, it is not eye for an eye, but ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. To love another as ourselves, to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Shana tova and gmar tov. We'll continue in just a moment on page 223.